So, I welcome you all to the third lecture of this course, Psychology of Personality and Individual Differences. So, this is we are starting module 2 today, and this is the first lecture of module 2 and overall it is third lecture. So, the module 2 is about personality assessment. So, in this module we will be mostly talking about the different aspects of personality assessment and the different methods by which we can assess personality. So, today we will be basically talking about personality assessment. We will just give you some introduction of the personality assessment, and mostly we will be talking about the different characteristics of the personality tests that are used to assess personality. So, just to give you a brief recap of the last lecture, in the last lecture we basically was talking about research methods that are used in the field of personality. So, there we talked about the personality psychology, how it uses scientific methods to study personality. We also talked about the different kind of approaches to study personality. So, in that context we talked about ideographic approach and nomothetic approach, and we tried to differentiate and compare the differences, pros and cons of both the approaches. And based on that we talked about there are three major designs, research designs that are used in the field of personality, which includes single case study method, then experimental method or design, and last is correlational design. And then we talked about the different sources of personality data, from where we get the data for studying personality, and we talked about the different sources including self report data. Then we talked about informants data, basically data given by someone who is closely associated with another person, so that they give just an assessment of certain aspects of that person. Then we talked about live data, which are basically recorded data that are there in different files, social medias and so on, which are kind of little bit more objective data. And at the last we talked about behavioral data, which is the data of behaviors or actions that are performed by the person either in the laboratory setting or in the in the natural real life setting. So, here we collect data, basically actions or behaviors are kind of collected as a data, not the reports. And in the behavioral data also include physiological data, where basically how body reacts to different stimulus and reactions in the environment, which includes different kinds of measuring blood pressure, skin resistance, and the brain imaging techniques and so on. And we discussed pros and cons of all these sources of data, and so researchers generally use based on whatever resources available to them. Based on that they use the different sources of data and different methodologies or research designs that is appropriate for particular research questions in the field of personality. So, today we will talk about basically personality assessment. We will give an introduction of personality assessment, and we will be mostly talking about what are the characteristics of good personality test. In that context, we will be talking about the reliability, validity and generalizability of a test. We will be also talking about major biases which are possible in the personality test and ethical issues that are significant in the field of personality testing and so on. Now, so when we talk about personality assessment, this is one of the most significant aspect or kind of field of study within psychology, which has a lot of applied implication in the different fields and different practical aspects of life. If you even layman person also knows a lot about personality assessment, but because personality assessments are done in different contexts and different applied settings. For example, personality assessments are done in clinical psychology to diagnose people with mental disorders. It is done for the normal individuals in different settings like organization, job selections and so on, to identify or select certain people with certain traits which are suitable for a particular job and so on. Personality assessments are also done in educational sectors to understand student motivation, to understand student engagement and so on. So, it has lot of applications. So, this is one of the probably well known area of psychology which has lot of application in different practical aspects of human lives. So, let us start talking about this whole concept of personality assessment today. So, just read these statements and kind of think about this statement, whether this statements reflects your personality or not. So, this some of the statements given here. For example, you have a great need for other people to like and admire you. This is one statement. You have a tendency to be critical of yourself. This is another statement. You have a great deal of unused capacity which you have not turned into your advantage. While you have some personality weaknesses, you are generally able to compensate for them. So, these are some of the statements. Just think about them and see whether these statements are true for yourself or not. Some other statements like disciplined and self-controlled outside, you tend to be worrisome and insecure inside. At times, you have serious doubts to whether you have made the right decisions or done the right thing. You prefer a certain amount of change and variety and become dissatisfied when hemmed in by restrictions and limitations. So, just think about these statements and just reflect on this statement and just see whether these statements kinds of reflects your personality or not. Now, if you see these kind of statements, most of the human being will find these are true for themselves, true descriptions of their characteristics. Why? Because these statements are generally kind of shared, or this kind of concepts or this kind of characteristics that were discussed in these statements are shared by most of the human beings. Okay? So, if you give a description of this kind of description to anyone, everyone will say it is my description of my personality. So, this phenomena is technically called as Barnum effect, which basically means that it occurs when an individual believes that the statements or descriptions about their personality or character are tailored specifically for them, when in fact these statements are general and could apply to many people. So, when you are given such kind of statement as a description of your personality, you may think this is a specific description of myself or my personality, but in fact these statements are very general and they are applicable to many human beings. Okay? So, this phenomena is called as a Barnum effect, and these are very broad statements of individuals that can have some aspect of truth or relevance to them for a lot of people, and one may kind of perceive them as description of highly accurate personality descriptions or meaningful description of themselves. Now, this kind of lot of this personality test, if you just look into this internet, there are probably hundreds of personality tests are floating around in the internet, and most of these tests are not kind of valid or reliable tests, simply because most of these tests use this kind of statements. And you may think it is a good right kind of description of myself, and probably this is not so, simply because they are using this Barnum effect, okay? Just to kind of and you may feel this is a right description. In fact, this is a description for most of the human beings. So, this is one issue that we need to understand in the personality testing, that personality tests, not all tests are kind of valid or reliable tests. Lot of these tests are kind of proposed or kind of made by people who doesn't have the scientific background of properly rigorously testing them. So, they just use this Barnum effect, and you may think these are very good tests, but in fact they are not actually good tests, because they are not able to distinguish your characteristics with other people. They are only giving some generalized descriptions. So, this is where the personality assessment comes into the picture in terms of proper rigorous personality assessment comes into the picture. So, how do you know whether a test is accurate or test is the right kind of test for you, when lot of the tests that are available may not be accurate, because they are just using Barnum effect. So, that is where personality assessment comes in, and personality psychology, a large deal of personality psychology kind of focuses on properly rigorously testing personality. And we will see as we progress in this course, different theories have different ways of measuring personality based on the theoretical concept they have. But today we will be talking about in general personality assessment. So, basically a personality assessment is measurement of individual characteristics. So, basically it measures your personality characteristics, whatever the disposition, relatively permanent consistent patterns of behavior that you have, or thought processes that you have. So, it will try to measure them, and it will also measure your unique characteristics which distinguish you from other individuals. So, there are many types or methods that researchers use to study personality or measure personality. Most commonly used are called personality tests. Okay. So, these personality tests are typically used, specifically designed test which measures personality, and the context of those measurement can be different depending on what is the purpose behind designing that particular test. We will see some of these things. So, some of the examples of personality tests which are very popular and commonly known in the field, one is called as MMPI, which basically means Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. This is a test that is used mostly in the clinical setup to kind of diagnose individuals with psychological difficulties and so on. And some of the aspect of this test is also used for employment screening and so on, but it is mostly used in the clinical setup, and it is one of the most rigorous tests that is well known in the field of psychology as well as in the different kinds of practical setup. Another test is called California Psychological Inventory or CPI. This is very similar to MMPI, but the context of use of this this one is basically used for normal population, not for clinical population. Another is called Hogan Personality Inventory, mostly used by employers for personnel selection, means selection of candidates for jobs and so on. So, like this there are many personality tests. We will get to know more about this personality test as we proceed in this course. So, this assessing personality involves basically measuring traits to understand individual better. So, basically the purpose behind measuring or evaluating personality is basically to understand the individual better, to understand what are the characteristics of that individual, so, that is the whole purpose, and this is very important because understanding individual characteristics is important in different settings. We need to understand about the individuals in different kind of applied setting. It is very significant. So, that is why it has a lot of application in various fields of studies within psychology and outside psychology also. For example, in clinical psychology, personality assessment is very important because if you do not understand the personality of the person, we may not be able to give right kind of therapies to that individual for the treatment and so on. So, understanding the person is the first more basic fundamental step that is required. School psychologists also use personality assessment to identify reasons behind students' issues and problems, why somebody is not able to, let us say, focus, or somebody is having motivational issues and so on. So, school psychologists may also use different personality assessment tests to understand students better and make improvements in them. Industrial organizational psychologists also use personality assessment for particularly selection of job candidates and so on. Also, they are used to understand the group dynamics in their organization itself. They can also use it for better leadership, understanding leadership qualities, motivation in the organization and so on. Counseling psychologists also used to understand the personality, as well as some of the counseling psychologists use them specifically in the job context also. Research psychologists anyway use personality if that variable is important in the research and so on. So, as you can see, personality assessment is very important not only for theoretical purpose, but also for lot of applied settings. So, that is why this is a very significant aspect of psychology, particularly within the personality psychology. Now, the most important question comes then, what are the characteristics of a good test? So, as we said, there can be many tests floating around, but how do you know a test is a good test or not? So, we need to look at a more rigorous test has certain characteristics. A good test has certain characteristics. So, those characteristics we will see what are those characteristics to kind of distinguish or differentiate between a good test and a bad test. So, typically legitimate or a good rigorous test will have three important characteristics. One is called as reliability, one is called as validity, and the third one is called as generalizability. These three characteristics if a test has, then it is a good test. So, these are the three important characteristics. So, basically most of the good tests or tests that are developed based on rigorous scientific research will have these three qualities. So, according to professional standards outlined by American Psychological Association or such kind of organization, developers of personality test must adhere to these criteria of reliability, validity and generalizability across different contexts. They should follow this or test these characteristics before claiming it to be a good test and so on. So, let us see what are these three characteristics. So, first start with the validity. What is the meaning of a validity of a test? So, when we talk about validity, we are talking about, it refers to whether a test accurately measures what it is intended to measure. So, whether a test measures what it claims to measure. So, that is the validity. Now, if a test is claiming to measure something, let us say anxiety, and if it is measuring anxiety, then it is a valid test. If a test claims to measure anxiety and it is measuring, let us say depression, then it is an invalid test, because whatever claim that is made by the test is not fulfilled. So, it is an invalid test. So, validity means what is the claim made by the test and is it fulfilling those claims or not. So, that is the basic idea of validity. So, for example, as we kind of see here, does a test designed to measure anxiety effectively measures anxiety levels? Is it able to measure anxiety levels of a person or not? If it is able to do it, then it is a valid test, means it is kind of able to fulfill its purpose. So, if a test lacks validity, basically then it is not measuring what it claims to measure. So, it is a simple idea. Then it is not it will not be able to predict anything, it will not be meaningful in terms of using it. So, it will lead to misleading pictures and the findings may not have any meaning in themselves. So, when we talk about validity, again there are three aspects or three kinds of validity, which kind of researcher kind of test them out. When we talk about test validity, so one is called as face validity, another is called as a construct validity, and the third one is called as criterion validity. So, these three kinds of validity are tested in different ways to kind of conclude that a test is a valid or not. So, testing validity requires different aspects. So, these three kind of types of validity kind of captures different aspects of validity or different ways of measuring validity. So, that you become much more confident that your test is valid. So, let us see what are these three types of validity or different aspects of validity. The first one is called face validity. So, face validity here basically means it is most rudimentary kind of validity and it is more of a face value level validity. So, this is not an empirical validity, but at the face value level, whether the test looks like whether it is measuring the things that is claiming to measure. So, that is called as a face validity. It refers to more of a superficial appearance or perception that a test measures the intended construct of interest. Okay. So, superficial level, if you look at the items of a test or the procedure of a test, then you can understand, okay, most of the things are whatever is there, it looks like it is measuring. Let us say it is for anxiety, then most of the items are kind of talking about anxiety and symptoms of anxiety. Then at the face level you can say, okay, it seems it is measuring what it claims to measure. So, face level mein whether the items or the whole structure of the questionnaire is kind of giving an indication, that appearance that it is measuring what it claims to measure. So, that is the face validity. For example, here if a test asks about symptoms of suicide ideation, sadness, changes in the appetite, then it seems, at least it will seems to, or it will appear that it is measuring depression, because these are all symptoms of depression. So, if a test has items related to suicide ideation, sadness, changes in appetite, loss of interest in life and so on, so which are all symptoms of depression, and if items are related to this kind of symptoms, then at the face level one can see, okay, now it is actually measuring depression. you are not kind of testing out, but at the face level you are able to understand, okay, this is measuring depression. So, that is why then it has a face validity. So, face validity is not very rigorous type of validity, it is more of an appearance type validity that is derived from the appearance. So, it serves some many practical purposes. It is important for certain purposes, that is why people, because it is the beginning of a test. So, it is important because especially in the settings like personnel testings, where cooperation and motivation of test taker can influence the result. Face validity is very important, Let us say you want to kind of testing this personality test, and whoever is taking those tests, they will become more interested in giving this test when the items look relevant to them, whatever they are you are trying to measure. If they think these items are irrelevant, they will lose motivation and they may not give accurate responses. So, if items has face validity, people will be more like, they will be more cooperative and motivated to test take, because they will be able to understand the relevance of this item in a particular context or construct that is measured. So, that is why face validity is important, especially for the cooperation and motivation of test takers. Second important thing is especially when people develop any test in the beginning phase of a test development, you have to start with a face validity. Let us say you want to develop a test for measuring depression or measuring anxiety, you have to kind of collect a pool of items that measures anxiety or that measures depression, whatever things that you are interested in. Now, these items should, how do you select those items? You will select those items only based on face validity only first. So, you will see theories and you will see what are the symptoms, what are the important things that should be measured. So, their initial level, you start with the face validity only, then you test it out other things. So, initial development of a test, face validity is very important. One has to start with face validity, and many times face validity also kind of can influence the cooperation and motivation of test takers. If the items are not relevant at all, they may lose interest and so on. So, face validity is important in those contexts. Now, face validity has some limitation in the sense this is not kind of this is just a starting phase people kind of start with, but face validity in itself does not reflect the validity of a test, So, because one thing is very subjective, subjectivity is involved in the face validity. Only on the appearance you are saying it looks like this is testing, but you are not kind of not 100% sure, So, one person may judge these items looks appearance wise looks fine, another may say no, I do not think these are fine, you should include something else or not. So, there may be some subjectivity involved in the face validity. Second important problem with the face validity is that it lacks scientific rigor, because this is mostly based on the appearance of the structure or items of the test. It does not have any empirical evidence for this. So, this is just starting point, but you cannot determine the validity of a test based on just face validity. Okay? So, for that we need to test other kinds of validity, which are construct validity and criterion validity, that we will be talking about. So, another kind of validity which is more of empirical, based on empirical or more rigorous test. So, as face validity is just based on appearance level, so we need to test out other types of validity. So, the next one is construct validity. Now, construct validity is basically based on the concept like every psychological test is designed to measure a specific underlying concept known as a construct. So, whenever we are measuring something in the field of psychology, so that whatever we are measuring, it is a concept that we are measuring, and this concept is derived from a theoretical framework. Okay? So, if you say we are measuring depression or we are measuring anxiety, so these are like concepts, and these concepts comes from certain theories, certain research background, which talks about what is the meaning of anxiety, what are the characteristics of anxiety, what are the symptoms of anxiety. So, construct validity kind of looks at the conceptual background from which this particular concept which you are trying to measure comes from. So, therefore, all tests must demonstrate construct validity, meaning they accurately assess the theoretical concept they are intended to measure. So, from whatever theoretical background this particular concept or construct that you are trying to measure, it should fit with those theoretical paradigm, then it has a construct validity. So, if you are, for example, it is already given in the slide, let us say you are considering a new test designed to measure empathy. Empathy is a concept in psychology. So, let us say you want to design a test to measure empathy level of individuals. The construct validity in this context of this empathy test would involve demonstrating that the test items effectively capture and assess the trait of empathy as defined by the theory. So, your test should include all the characteristics of the trait of empathy as proposed by the theory of empathy, whatever theory you are using. Then if your test items reflect those theoretical background accurately, then it has a construct validity. Now, people, because construct validity is a theoretical driven kind of concept. So, to establish that kind of it kind of needs to kind of we need to find out its connection with other concepts. So, to establish a construct validity, we need to demonstrate two more things. One is called as a convergent validity, another is discriminant validity. So, these are basically two another ways of establishing validity which are connected to the construct validity. So, you have a construct validity So, construct validity, to establish a construct validity we need to, how do you establish, because this is based on a theoretical concept. So, you have a theoretical theory, from there a concept is derived, then you are trying to measure it. How do you measure it? So, the process is you need to test out two important validity. One is called as convergent validity and another is kind of called as discriminant validity or divergent validity, sometimes people call it. So, to establish construct validity, because it is more of a theoretical thing, so we need to specifically, how do you empirically test it out? Now, it is very easy to say it should reflect what the from where theories, this particular concept comes from, what theories, it should reflect that. But how do we actually do that? For that we need to establish something called as a convergent validity and discriminant validity or divergent validity. Now, so what are these two? Convergent validity is basically, it is about showing that a test correlates positively with other tests measuring the same or similar concept or similar construct. This demonstrates that the test accurately captures the intended construct by aligning with existing measures of the same trait. So, let us say convergent basically means what? So, you are developing a new test. So, it should positively correlate with other constructs or other measures of a constructs which are similar. So, if two concepts are similar, so there are many concepts in psychology which are probably theoretically they have lots of similarity. So, if you are developing a test to measure something and you have already some established measures to measure some other constructs which are very similar in nature, if your test measure also correlates positively with that similar construct, then it is a convergent validity. So, both are going together, means similar direction they are showing and they are measuring similar thing, then probably it shows there is a convergent validity. Now, discriminant validity is just opposite to that. So, your test should discriminate between other constructs which are not similar. So, it should kind of show similarity with similar concept, it should discriminate with other constructs which are different. So, that is the meaning of discriminant validity. In discriminant validity, it ensures that a test does not correlate strongly with measures of unrelated constructs. ठीक है, जो unrelated constructs उससे unrelated, it should be unrelated, and the constructs which are related should be related. Your whatever new measures that you are doing, whatever associated construct should be correlated, whatever constructs which are not related should not be related. So, this is how empirically you can find correlations. So, this is how you can establish construct validity. So, this demonstrates that a test distinguishes and specifically measures the targeted concept without confounding with the unrelated traits. So, that is how lot of people actually this is how empirically one can test out the construct validity using the concept of convergent validity and discriminant validity. This is an example that is given how it is established. For example, there is a very well known scale that the name of is need for cognition scale. It was developed by Kasiappo and Patty in 1982, and it is still used, one of the very popular scale in the field of psychology. So, this scale was developed, and how the construct validity of this scale was tested out. It was tested out like construct validity was kind of examined by finding its correlations with other constructs. This scale was found to correlate positively with open mindedness, supporting convergent validity, because the need for cognition basically the need for thinking kind of your need to think about different aspects. So, the more you are tend to think about diverse aspects about anything, or more you are there is a desire to think about different aspects of life. So, need for cognition means how much need you have to think about different things, effortful thinking and so on. Now, this concept is very similar to concept of open mindedness. The more open minded you are, the more you are likely to think freely and effortfully. Now, how they develop this convergent validity, or one of the aspect of construct validity is by they found a positive correlation of this scale, score of this scale with another scale called scale of open mindedness. Since these two concepts are kind of theoretically should be correlated positively, theoretically they should be positively connected, and the measures also says that shows that they are positively connected. So, that means it has convergent validity. Whatever theoretically should be connected, it is connected. So, that is the meaning of, then that is how they establish convergent validity. How they established discriminant validity? They established discriminant validity when the scale did not correlate significantly with constructs which are very dissimilar or unrelated, like test anxiety or social desirability, which demonstrate discriminant validity by showing that test measures distinct concepts unrelated to this construct. So, when this score of the test was correlated with other tests which are very unrelated concept like anxiety, test anxiety or social desirability, and they found these are not strongly correlated with this concept. So, theoretically they should not be correlated. So, they are not actually correlated. So, that establishes discriminant validity. Okay. This is how, this is an example that shows how a researcher establish construct validity using convergent as well as discriminant validity concepts empirically. The third way of establishing validity is called criterion validity. So, criterion validity is basically done by comparing the result of a test to an external standard such as another established test or behavioral outcome. So, certain external criteria are fixed, and then they find connection with those external criteria, which could be like some behavioral outcome which is expected from those concepts, and they see the relationship with that. So, certain criteria are established first, and then the connection of the test score with those criteria are established to establish a criterion validity. Again, obviously theoretical understanding and theories will play a role in even in criterion validity also, because you cannot put aside theories. Here only certain criteria which should be expected to be connected, they are established and then they are seen the connection with that. If that is connected as per the expectation, then it establishes criterion validity. So, this validation process aims to determine how well the test measures the intended construct or trait. For example, a test designed to assess extroversion or introversion should effectively differentiate between the individual who seek social interaction and those who prefer solitude. Now, when we talk about a certain concept or measuring certain concept, let us say we are measuring people, trying to measure extrovert people and introvert people. Now, one of the criteria of introvert extrovert is that people who are extrovert, they seek more social interactions, they love interacting with people more, and introvert people on the other hand, they are less likely to interact with people. Okay? So, this is a criterion, kind of comes from the theories and understanding of the people. Now, if your test which is developed to measure this introvert extrovert is able to differentiate these tendencies of people, then it has criterion validity. If somebody scores high on extrovert and you see these people are more likely to socialize, they are more seeking social connection, that means your scale is valid. It is showing criterion validity. That means whatever these particular people should expected to behave, they are behaving. So, your scale is a valid scale. So, this is the meaning of an criterion validity. So, certain criterion are established based on what is expected, and then you see whether your test scores predict that or not. So, that is the meaning of a criterion validity. So, again the same scale, need for cognition scale, will give an example from that scale, how this scale establish criterion validity. We have already seen how it established construct validity. Now, we will see how this scale, because it is already an established well known scale, we will see how this scale actually used criterion validity. So, this scale basically measured desires for or an enjoyment of effortful thinking. How much people enjoy thinking, what is the desire for thinking and so on. Some people are more thinking oriented, some people are less thinking oriented and so on. So, this scale measures that. Okay. Now, how do you establish criterion validity for this scale? What they did, so these actually are done by those researcher, this is not an assumption. So, this researcher Kashyap and Petty, what they compared two distinct groups of people. One group is college professors and another is assembly line workers. So, there is a natural understanding that these two group of individual will have different need for cognition. They will be different, because if you see the profession, let us say college professor, their whole profession is thinking oriented, they need to think and analyze and those things. So, the need for cognition will be higher in this group as compared to assembly line workers. Assembly line worker, there is no need for thinking, they do mechanical tasks, same routine task every day. They have to put one thing from here to there and that is all, whole day this is their work. There is no scope for thinking there. So, naturally, if your scale, if the scale shows that college professors score high on the need for cognition as compared to assembly line worker, that means it is a valid scale. It is distinguishing people who should be distinguished on that particular concept. So, as they hypothesized, they found actually the college professors scored higher on the need for cognition scale compared to the assembly line workers, which indicates that the test successfully captures an important criterion or behavioral outcome that it is supposed to distinguish between these two groups. So, that means it is a valid scale then. So, it is able to kind of distinguish between groups of people who are different in that particular concept. So, this is how it is established. So, many invalid tests that are there in the internet and where they claim to measure personality, which are not based on rigorous such validity test, they are not able to distinguish people. So, because they do not have this criterion validity and so on. So, they will give general statement which everybody will say is right, but they will not be able to distinguish such kind of groups of people. So, that is how they are not valid. Now, the next concept that comes to understand the for a test is test reliability. So, validity we have seen. Now, reliability of test means what? Reliability is estimate of how consistent a test is. A good test gives consistent results over time, items and raters. Okay. So, consistently it should show something similarly. Let us say if I take a test today and let us say after a month I take the same test. So, there has to be some consistency, because I am the same person. If my score is today is one score and after 1 month it completely changes, that means that it is not a reliable test. It is not able to consistently kind of detect something. So, that consistency is called reliability. If it is a consistent, then it is reliable. A good test gives consistent results. So, consistently it is able to detect something. So, that is reliability. So, reliability is prerequisite of validity. So, without reliability a test cannot be valid. So, reliability is prerequisite. So, if test is valid, then it will consistently give the scores whatever it is, because it is valid. So, consistency is an indicator of validity also, because it is a prerequisite. We cannot know the correct time with an unreliable watch. Okay. So, because if you see a watch is unreliable means what? It is not showing consistently time, when it should be 10 it is showing 9 or something like that. So, if it is inconsistent, so the timing is shown by a watch is inconsistent, that means it is unreliable watch. Similarly, a test or a measure first must be consistent to be called as a valid representation of an underlying theoretical concern. So, if it is not consistent, we cannot say it is a valid test. So, both are connected to each other. So, reliability refers to a consistency and reproducibility of a test scores, kind of in the repeated measurements. So, this measurement can involve administering a test at different times. So, how do you establish reliability? It can be done by administering the test at different times and see what is the correlation. It can also be done using multiple test items of the same test or using some other test, or involving different judges and observers. Different raters can give rating of a particular individual in a test, and if they are kind of highly correlated, then that also shows test is reliable. So, let us see these 3 ways of establishing reliability. So, reliability can be established under conditions of when over time if you take multiple tests and see correlations across different items within the test, whether the different items within the test are consistently kind of correlated to one another or not. When scored by different raters and observer, what is the similarity with that different observers. So, that also shows reliability. So, these are the different aspects of reliability essential for evaluating the consistency and dependability of a test. So, this is how you establish reliability. So, let us see these 3 aspects very briefly. So, temporal consistency also shows reliability of a test. So, that means this is how it is done. To assess this, researcher have a participant take a test second time to see if their scores are similar. As I said, so multiple times the particular person will take the test and see whether the scores are similar or not, because personality does not change overnight or something like that. So, if I take a test today and after a month scores should be by and large similar, because the person will not change in 1 month or something like that. If completely different scores are coming, that means it is not a reliable test. So, care must be taken to ensure that the participants are not merely recalling the previous response or influenced by practice effect. So, if you take the test very soon, let us say today you take the test, again tomorrow you take, then anyway it will be similar because they remember all the scores and all the items and whatever they have filled. So, that has to be also taken care that they should not recall what they have done earlier. So, sufficient gap should be given between the test, or sometimes just practice effect you become more expert in that and immediately give the similar responses. So, those things has to be kind of taken care to establish that reliability. So, time interval between the test administration should be long enough to eliminate this memory and practice effect, but should not be too long that a participant's characteristics change significantly. If you take a test, let us say after 4 or 5 years later, then obviously the person may change also. Then there is no meaning in looking at reliability of a test with such a long gap of time. So, that is something important. So, temporal consistency, if both the test scores given after certain time are similar scores or kind of almost similar, then it is a reliable test. Another is called as internal consistency reliability, which basically means it is checked by examining different items within the test produce similar results, because all the items within the test, let us say a test has 10 items, all these items are attempted or designed to measure the same thing. So, there has to be correlation within them, positive correlation within those items, because all the items are connected to the same concept. These are kind of sub aspect within the same concept. So, they should also be kind of positively correlated. So, this is called as an internal consistency reliability. So, mostly developer use methods like creating two comparable version of a test, same test ka two comparable version, and they see correlations, or they split the same test into two halves. So, what let us say 10 items, so 5 items they will split and they will see the scores are correlated or not, which is called as a split half reliability. So, this is another way. Today mostly people do not do all of this, they are just kind of calculate a score called Cronbach alpha, which shows an indication of this internal consistency of the items. So, it gives you an idea whether the test is reliable or not. The last one is inter-rater reliability, when two or more raters give a rating of a third person using a test, and they see whether they all agree on the same thing. If they all agree using the same test, then probably this test is more reliable. So, researcher aim to ensure measures are reliable across multiple raters, multiple people who are kind of giving the scores. So, this inter-rater reliability is assessed by having two or more independent judges rate the personality or behavior of a third party. So, these measures of inter-rater reliability include calculating average correlation coefficients or percentage of agreement among raters. So, this is how it is calculated, correlation you calculate or kind of percentage of agreement, how, to what extent, to what percent they are kind of agree with each other. High correlation among raters score indicates strong inter-rater reliability, suggesting the agreement in the judgment, and it shows that test is measuring the same thing because different people are finding out almost similar scores and so on. So, disagreement among raters may be due to factors if the items are concept is very ambiguous, not very clear, items are not making much meaning and so on. All these things can lead to disagreement and so on. So, those should be kind of looked at. The third important concept of a test kind of a good test is test generalizability. Test should be generalizable, means when you have developed a test, whether it can be used in other context or not, or it is only limited to that people or not, that individual or that setting. So, test generalizability in the context of personality refers to extent to which the findings and conclusion drawn from the test can be applied or generalized to different population, different settings, and used beyond those which it was originally developed and validated. Can it be used in other context also? Whatever context it was developed, can it be generalized to other contexts? So, that is the meaning of a test generalizability. Now, generalizability is the degree to which the measures retains the validity across various contexts. Will it be also valid in other context, or it is only valid within a particular context? So, in most of the tests, generalizability is tested based on population characteristics, setting uses and cultural background. Can they be generalized across population, across setting, across cultural background? So, population characteristics means when you develop a test, you may develop it for a particular population, target population. It could be let us say for adults, or it could be let us say for children or certain age groups. Many tests are like this, which are specific for particular age groups and so on. They may not be very generalizable, but some tests may have generalizability across population. It involves to see whether this test is valid to different genders, different ethnicities or different other background people and so on. So, if it is valid for different contexts, that means it has more generalizability. Okay. So, that means it has much more wider application. Okay. Researcher need to assess whether the patterns and relationship observed in personality assessment hold true across diverse population to ensure its applicability in different contexts. Okay. So, more generalizable a test is, its validity is more widespread. That does not mean the tests which are developed for a particular context are not valid, they are valid within those contexts, but generalizability gives them more kind of more wide applications. Now, setting and uses, some tests are developed within a particular setting like clinical setting, and if now it depends on whether this can be generalized to other population like normal individuals or not. So, some tests are very specific to clinical settings, some tests are more for general population and so on. So, if a test is able to kind of validly used in different settings, then it is more generalizable. If it is not, then it is less generalizable. The third important consideration in generalizability is cultural consideration. So, most of the tests that are developed are within a cultural setting. Can they be used in other setting? In psychological research, one of the major problem that researchers face is that most of the questionnaires or assessment instruments are developed in the Western cultures, and the question comes in front of researcher is that should we use the same question as it is in, let us say I am doing research in Indian culture, because people and mindset will be very different. So, whatever items they develop in their culture, can it be relevant in our culture also or not? So, if it is relevant, then it has a cultural kind of generalizability. If it is not, then it is limited to certain culture. So, nowadays this cultural generalizability is given lot of importance, and people now try to kind of see more culture specific things and on. So, in that context many Western scale may not be generalizable to other cultures. So, these cross cultural validation studies are essential to ensure that personality tests are culturally fair and valid. Otherwise, if they are not fair and valid, that means the lot of these tests may give misinformation in the context of other cultures. With that comes basically ethical issues in personality assessment. So, personality assessment has a lot of implications, because it is used in different concept and different applied context of human life. If they are not properly done, then they may have lot of ethical issues involved in it, which we need to take care for applying personality test. So, psychologically valid test emerged basically over a centuries ago. One of the first test was by Alfred Binet, who developed first intelligence test in Paris towards the end of 19th century. So, Binet's intelligence test is one of the first tests that developed to measure IQ scores and intelligence and so on. It was mainly aimed to develop bright students who are mistakenly labeled as stupid. So, many students who are actually intellectually bright, but they are mistaken because of their social behavior and so on as stupid due to factors like hearing or language impairments and so on. So, he aimed to assist these individuals in terms of getting admissions and so many things in applied aspects. So, that was one of the first tests that was developed mostly in the context of intelligence and so on. Psychological testing or beyond intelligence test also kind of which talks about diagnosing psychological issues or relationship problems also kind of accurately and identify individual strength, personality traits. So, many also tests develops later on. Now, using of all these tests fairly is very important, because they were all developed for the benefits of the people. So, that you identify certain people with certain characteristics and put them the right context in terms of job, in terms of assessment of psychological issues and problems, so that they can be treated. So, the purpose of all these tests are kind of to give benefit all the people. And despite all these benefits, there is a risk of misuse of this kind of personality test and may lead to inaccuracies due to the way it is used and the way they are developed and so on. So, there comes the issue of kind of ethical issues. So, inaccurate testing can have serious consequences, no doubt about it, because they have serious practical implications, especially if the level if you label an individual as less worthy or discriminate these people against certain groups. Error biases in such cases can be particularly tragic. So, इस तरह का if certain test discriminate people, which was there in lots of cases of in the American testing also, the school admissions, the blacks were said that they are discriminated in terms of getting admission to schools and so on during those the movement and so on. So it is possible that certain tests are developed which only a certain group of people will be more able to handle them, because it is coming from their background and so on. So, that in that sense certain tests may discriminate against certain groups of people. So, such biases could be problematic and lead to a lot of practical implications. Stephen Jay Gould in his book The Mismeasure of Man, he discussed this whole narrative of scientific racism. Gould highlights that even many prominent scientists and figures like Paul Broca, who was a physician and also kind of neuroscientist in the mid 19th century were influenced by a lot of these prejudices in assessing intelligence and so on. Broca used skull size as a measurement to support the erroneous notion that men were intellectually superior to women and Caucasians were smarter than Africans and so on. This was his prejudice, which he kind of found validation using some of these erroneous ideas like measuring skull size as an indicator of intelligence and so on. So, this even scientists were kind of influenced by a lot of these biases. So, many scientists like Broca also likely to unaware of these biases influencing many their interpretations, as they were driven by pre-existing beliefs rather than objective scientific inquiry. So, Gould suggests that similar biases may affect modern personality testing. It is possible. So, it is very important that identify those biases, which may not be very easy. Psychological assessment has been used or misused, particularly intelligence tests earlier, and such misuse can be also possible with personality test. Some assessment that are designed to screen job applicants may unintentionally favor certain groups while discriminate against certain marginalized group. It is possible. So, this misuse parallels using like medical diagnosis not for aid in the treatment, but label them as undesirable or disease. So, this is kind of similar thing. So, the purpose of these tests are always to benefit people, not to kind of discriminate people. So, if that happens, then it is an really serious ethical issues. So, those are possibilities within a lot of tests if they are not properly kind of developed, properly used and so on. So, it is not about kind of outlawing this testing and not to use them. The idea is to use proper construction, proper use, and wrongful employment of certain personality tests should be avoided. So, that is the main idea. Some of the other ethical issues which are kind of included in all the testing are like one should take informed consent of the individuals before taking test. Person should give consent, you cannot just forcefully test somebody. Informed consent is very important, and they should be informed about how the result will be used and so on. Only if they say yes, then one should go ahead with that test. Confidentiality and privacy of the information is very important. One's name should not be disclosed. Mostly in the research, anonymous names are never disclosed in the research. In the research, only data is used. So, no one can connect this data with a particular person, because names are not recorded or directly given in the research and so on. So, the data should be confidential and privacy should be maintained of a person, because there is a possibility of misuse of those data. One should always use valid and reliable tests based on the measure that we discussed. One should avoid biases and discrimination. As we said, even great scientists could also be biased if they have a very strong prejudices. Professionally competent people should use, or who are qualified should use this test and interpret those tests. These all comes under ethical issues. And test results should also be appropriately used, responsibly used, should not be misused. One should also respect the diversity of people, their cultural background and so on, ethnicity and so on should be also properly taken into account, and to understand and also judge whether a test is sensitive enough to capture those differences or not. In addition to that, there are three major biases which is possible in the personality test, intentionally or unintentionally. These three common biases which are generally possible in or have been observed in personality test are like ethnic biases, gender biases and response biases. When we say ethnic biases, basically ethnic biases refers to tendency of personality test to produce different results or interpretation based on person ethnic or cultural background. If such test which kind of consistently gives different results of people with a different cultural background or ethnic background, that means it has a certain ethnic biases in that, because it is consistently giving different result for people of certain background. All too often tests fail to take into account of the relevance of the culture and subculture of the person being tested. Theories and measures developed in one culture are improperly applied to another culture. That is why cultural sensitivity in the development of the test and the theories are very important. Then only right kind of test will come into the picture. So, that is cultural aspect should also be taken into account while developing those tests or interpreting the results. This can occur because of differences in the language norms, because some tests, let us say, develop in English language. When they are translated, they may have also certain biases in some other languages. Values of cultures may differ. Some items may be very important for one culture, it may not be relevant for another culture. So, that is how score will also differ. So, all these things has to be taken into consideration. Many tests could be also, items could also be perceived differently across culture, as I said, leading to misinterpretation or inaccurate assessment of certain traits, because those traits may not be relevant in certain cultures. And if you give too much importance to that, then there is a possibility of discrimination. Ethnic biases can result in unfair evaluation, stereotypes, generalization based on cultural norms and so on. Example, let us say a personality test include items that assess that kind of measures assertiveness or communication style based on Western cultural norms, which may not be accurately reflect the communication style valued in other cultures. So, communication style that are there in, let us say, in Western culture may not be equally valid in other cultures, but let us say the test is measuring only those Western concept of communication style. Then it is possible individual from non-Western background may score very low on those assertiveness and communication, which because may not be true from the perspective of their culture. So, that is how it could bias. There is also possibility of gender bias in certain tests. Gender bias happens only when the test uses items which are very stereotypical of a particular gender. Some personality traits may be traditionally associated with specific genders, leading to biases. Tests developed may inadvertently include gender biased languages. Sometimes some tests may use those things, assumptions which lead to certain biases. So, that may lead to inaccurate assessment or biases within the gender. For example, personality assessments that emphasizes assertiveness or leadership as a masculine quality or trait, nurturing and empathy as feminine traits, can lead to this reinforced gender stereotypes. So, these are kind of gender stereotypes that females are generally, although masculine and feminine is not a biological gender based concept, this is more of a psychological quality, but females are typically associated with empathy and nurturing qualities, males are typically associated with leadership quality and assertiveness and so on. So, let us say a test is using those stereotypes in their measurement, then it will have a gender stereotype and so on. Now, the last one is response bias. People can biasly give response to a lot of these tests, which can give an inaccurate result. It refers to tendency of individuals to respond to test items in a way that does not reflect the true personality traits. So, they are not truly reflecting in the response, they are giving response in a certain biased way. Common type of response bias includes social desirability bias. That means, you are putting yourself in the positive light, you are responding in such a way that you look better. So, let us say somebody is measuring self esteem items, you are giving very high scores to self esteem, which may not be true for you, then it is a response bias. You are not giving the true reflection of what your actual state is, but rather than you want to show yourself in the positive light, then it is a response bias, where individual responds in a socially desirable manner rather than truthful manner. So, response bias can also result from agreement bias. So, you agree with all the items, so you do not mindfully look at items and agree with whatever is said. That means it is a response bias. You are not responding properly without seeing the content. People can also give extreme responding, like consistently selecting extreme responses. Like if let us say a question is about agreement or disagreement, so in the question there is a scale where says let us say 5 is for strongly agree. So if that person gives all the items strongly agree consistently, then it is an extreme responding. You cannot probably most of the cases it is not possible that you strongly agree with everything. So this could be also lead to response biases. Some people also fake good and bad, intentionally altering the response to create a favorable unfavorable impression. So faking goodness, or what is somebody is giving bad thing or good thing, then that also leads to response biases. That can also influence the result test. So response bias can distort the test result. So you will not get the accurate picture of that person. So that is also problematic, because it will give an inaccurate personality description profile of that person, which will influence the reliability of assessment. So addressing these biases requires very careful test development, validation and interpretation. Some people try to look into those response biases and use as items they use wordings in the items, some items positively worded, some are negatively worded items, so that they need to carefully look at those items rather than just mechanically giving scores. So some few things can be done, but obviously if somebody consciously fakes everything, then it is not possible. So these are some of the things that one need to take care of establishing scales. So this is about the introduction of personality assessment. So in order to understand a good test, we need to rigorous test goes through so many things. It is very clear. You see, so many complexities are involved in it. It is not so easy to develop a test and say it is a test that measures personality. So much of rigorous research goes into behind it. So this is about introduction of personality assessment. In the next lecture, we will be giving more specific tests that are associated with personality assessment. That will be covered in the next lecture. With this, I stop here. Thank you.